It's Friday the 22nd of April and we're live from New College, Nottingham. I'm George Lamb and this is The Great Debate. I'd like to welcome our audience here today and our panellists. Let's meet them.
Hello, I'm Lucy Coates and I'm from Newcastle, North East England.
Hi, I'm Sophie Butler and I live in Nottingham.
My name is Sarah Gilkinson, I'm also from Nottingham.
My name is James Fry and I'm also from Nottingham.
So today we're looking at the topic, should the voting age be lowered to 16? This is a hot topic right now, especially with the EU referendum. So I'm going to just throw it out there to what you guys think. If we start with you, Lucy.
Well, yes, I am very for lowering the voting age to 16 because, you know, we've got to give people the choice these days and younger people are the future at the end of the day.
Okay, Sophie?
I agree with what she just said, yeah.
You agree? Good. Okay, we'll pass it over to Sarah.
So Casey mentioned the word choice. I think at age 16 they have enough decisions to make in their lives without having to make the decision or have the pressures make a decision who runs the country. Agree, James?
I do agree. I think at 16, 17 there's a lot of responsibilities, a lot of external pressure and stress from all sorts of sources, deciding whether you want to carry on with education, further education, into job, and you just don't need to have this on your plate at the same time when there's so much else to focus on.
Well, you know, it's just, I mean, at 16 you're starting to mature. And I mean, not only can you do things such as have consent to have sex and be in relationships, but also you have the consent to join the army. And I mean, if we are letting young people take charge of the country at war, then why on earth can't they vote? Because I mean, surely that's...
Well, you're not actually in a battle position until you're 18, so it's actually education until you're 18 anyway, so...
Yeah, but they are still part of the armed forces, they are still taking control, they are still...
Have you seen Full Metal Jacket?
A
lot of the stress is in the barracks, not on the battlefield.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really important
But there's
place
stress
to
in
be.
education anyway, and it's still a form of education before you're actually in any battle role.
Yep.
What do we think about education as far as politics is concerned? Particularly, we're talking secondary school when you're coming up to 16. Do you think there is enough education about politics?
There should be some form of law. When you get to the age 15 to 16, the 2 years before you leave secondary school, okay, even in sixth form, there should be something implemented in school, okay, into lessons. There should be some kind of law or moral and ethical issues, and maybe politics as well at school nowadays. If this has been up for debate, okay, so if this has been brought up into the media or if the government are even considering it, it must have been brought up somewhere for this debate to happen, and also for the debate to happen in real life, I think we should be educating them at school age about politics.
What about you guys? If this were to be legalised, do you think education in terms of politics should be improved at secondary school level?
I mean, yeah, of course, like it should be taken into place and there should be you should be shown like things such as like the manifestos and what the different parties deal with. But I think every 16-year-old has like some form of knowledge of like what the parties are doing. And I mean, if you can pay tax at 16 and you're in a working role, you're therefore part of the working class. So why shouldn't you be able to vote?
I think the problem is at 16, 17, most people are still in education. You're in quite a narrow frame of mind in which you're focusing mainly on education. All of your influence is only coming from sort of teachers and friends, so it's not necessarily your views that you'll be portraying, but those that are being inflicted onto you.
I think no matter what age you are, though, the background that you've had, and especially like your parents do influence what you... I mean, yes, you can change it over time, and I mean, it's not entirely onto what type of background you've had, but it always has some sort of leeway in like who you vote for.
Do we worry that at 16, given that you, as you said, you're starting to mature, that parents will still have a much bigger influence over you maybe than when you are 18 and perhaps fleeing the nest, so to speak? So is it inevitable that your opinions in terms of voting will be the same as your parents?
I think there's a lot of people now that are older that still really kind of cling on to the views of their parents.
Yeah, that's
Maybe they're
right.
just not aware of it.
So it doesn't matter either way?
I mean, like for example, if you're from... if you're from a party like UKIP, and maybe, I don't know, I mean, you think people like Nigel Farage, for example, he has all the facts at his fingertips about immigration, but he still decides that they're the devil. That must have been some influences he's had from parents or how he's been raised.
Yeah, I think parents always have an influence, because, like, I mean, well, I mean, not in every case, but in a lot of cases, they are your role models. And I mean, I know from my instance, like, I do listen to what they say. So yeah, I know it's each to their own, and you've got to make your own opinion, but they do sway you to how you vote. And I think I'm 20, and I still do listen to them.
Lucy touched on an important point about paying tax over there. If you are able to work and pay tax, do you not therefore have the right to vote for the people to whom you are paying?
If they're going to give the responsibility, okay, to a 16-year-old to vote, okay, they should also be giving them a little bit more money. Okay, £3.75 an hour for a 16-year-old going to work. It's pretty modern day. It's modern day sleep. I know, but it's the average wage for someone who, if they're not in education, okay, or not in an internship somewhere, their wage is £3.75 an hour.
I worked at a pet shop and got £5.50.
See, on the McDonald's, the big corporate employees, okay, the main corporate and the HMVs and the the big companies, okay, they're hiring £3.75 an hour, and I think that's a massive contradiction from the government to say, okay, you're really responsible, okay, you can vote, who runs the country, okay, but then it depends on what's in it for them. Okay?
But like a lot of people who are given the right to vote know nothing about it anyway. Like, I mean, there's an awful lot of people who vote who are like 30 who just vote because the nana said that Labour were going to give them a bit more money. So
I think you'll get that with friends.
Or they vote because the politician's attractive. Like,
but exactly. So a teenager, okay. So let's take for example, a teenage girl, okay, will fancy, say, this big hero on television, okay, because their friends do. 16-year-olds are a lot more influenced by each other in the playground, okay, and at colleges than they are in, than
I still think
in
though,
society.
like in your 20s and stuff, like you still like
yeah,
that anyway.
I'd argue that like high school never ends really. I mean, you think about the office environment, bullying still occurs in the workplace. It's not that different from a school environment. People feel like, I suppose in school you have to be there, but really if you're relying on that job, you really do have to be there, and bullying can occur in that same constricted environment.
I'm sure that's a problem with the system and people and education, as opposed to actually with politics and how old people should be allowed to be.
Politics decides what happens in education, so it always comes back to politics.
So, well, let's just end it there for now, guys. We're going to go over to a VT that will tell us what members of the public had to think about this issue. If we all just want to stew for a moment.
I don't believe that the voting age should be lowered to 16. I don't think that most 16-year-olds are tuned in enough to politics to be able to vote. Say, with the recent Scottish referendum, a lot of interviews with 16-year-olds showed that a lot of them just wanted to leave the UK because an independent Scotland sounds kind of nice. I don't think that's a good enough reason politically. I think that's lacking critical thinking. And so I don't think that 16-year-olds should be able to vote.
Personally, I think they should lower the voting age to 16. I feel the youth of today are our future. They're the generation that are going to take this country into the future. And I feel they deserve a say, a lot more as well, on where we should be heading, who should be in charge, what our votes, what our opinions, what our thoughts are. And I feel they can lead the country to where we need to go next.
So we've seen what the public have to say. Now we've got an interview with Andrew Lake, a youth worker for Leicestershire County Council, who spends a lot of time working with young people on issues, including politics and political education. So moving on now to Andrew Lake.
My name is Andrew Lake. I'm a youth worker who works with the County Council. I think that's a very good idea because young people, a lot of young people, do not vote and do not take part in democracy. Often I'm in polling stations when elections are on and I very rarely see young people coming in to vote. That worries me because young people aren't really being part of a full society, and often they want to make change, and a lot of the good changes that have happened in our community have been caused by young people. Yet, they're not taking part in the democratic process. and it would be good for them to include themselves fully in the community. Voting can seem quite complex when you first get your card in the post. You're thinking, well, what's all that about? Because no one really tells you how to vote and what you do with it, you know, and where you go, what polling station is, how it works. So there's a need to take away a lot of the worries that a lot of young people will have when they first get their vote. And things can be done to encourage young people to vote. You know, there could be a lot of education done in schools around different political education things and why voting is important and where the vote came from. A lot of girls do not know that, you know, a lot of women actually died to get them the vote, and they need to sort of seize the opportunity to value that history.
So now we've heard what others have to say, we would like to hear what you, the audience, have to think. Do you think the voting age should be lowered to 16, or do you think you should be over 18? If anyone does have a question, if you could please come down and put it towards either of our panellists. Hello there.
Hi, my name's Matt and I'm based from Sarah. You both said earlier that there is a lot of pressure on young people and students especially, but wouldn't you say that there'd be more pressure in joining the army? And as much as you said that, yeah, they're not actually in combat, if we went into a war of any kind, then they would be forced to battle straight away, which is why they learn how to use firearms straight away so that they can combat.
Okay, career, going in the army as a 16-year-old is a career choice. Fundamentally, it's a job, okay, it always has been. So they have made that application to go in the army, okay, it's their choice. They do, like James said earlier on, they are educated for 2 years before they go in there. I know what you're saying, if they had to go, if national service wasn't, they had to get pulled up in the army, they wouldn't leave the classroom or leave where they are just to go onto the field. They would have some kind of training, but individually that is their choice and that is their career choice and a job that they have to go through the application process for. And if they're not physically fit or sound-minded, okay, they won't even get in there in the first place. They'll go into the territorial army and be asked to do a menial job like logistics or stores or things like that, or PT instructors. Okay, but it's their fundamental choice to vote, to go into that career choice, just like they would in any other job.
But then the fact that they're not trusted then to vote, but people trust them enough to give their lives to fight for them.
That's because they've had the training. It's just exactly the same as anything. If you get in any kind of job and say, would you trust a 16-year-old to do that job? Would you trust a 16-year-old to go into medicine? Would you trust a 16-year-old to go into, you know, into any profession? If they would, there'd be more professions they could go into. Even the government are saying now you have to be in at the age of 16. You cannot leave school and go into nothing. You have to go into a job, or if you have to go into education. That makes sense.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hello.
I wanted to put the question of, if at the age of 16 you're meant to choose a career, a life choice for yourself, that's very important at that sort of stage of life. How can you then say that they are then not also then mature enough to go out and vote for who should be in charge?
I think at that age, sort of career choice is taken a lot more seriously, and it's not as influenced by your peers or by a teacher or by social media. I think with things such as politics, where it's a view that you can hear and then say yourself, a lot of people do use social media and their friends' opinions and almost regurgitate it without actually feeling that they agree with it, but more just to fit in. And
I think that'll always happen at any age, though.
But it's more likely to happen.
Social media is now used by like an awful lot of the older generation, so therefore their opinions are then changed by Jeremy Corbyn's nice speech on how he's going to publicise, I don't even know, trains. And so like therefore they then think, oh, that's great because I use a train. Like, do you know what I mean? So like, I mean, your opinion can be changed no matter what age you are. Just because you're younger doesn't mean that you can't vote.
But 16-year-olds are a lot more vulnerable, okay, than
a 40-year-old person going through a midlife crisis is vulnerable as well.
I think there's a merit to the kind of purity of being that age and your intentions really being down to the policies of the politicians and what's going to help you in your future. I think as you age and you understand more about the kind of dark side of things, you can have alternative agendas and things. You tend to vote more kind of tactically, and that's not always the best thing, rather than just voting for what you think's right.
Also, older people vote down to what happened years ago. Like, the younger people at least know, like, how they want things to be in the future, whereas the older generation tend to look back on how things were.
So the young generation, if the young generation obviously could do that, it would be a completely different kettle of fish. If the younger generation knew what happened back in the 1970s and how poor the country was, and the country wasn't destitute in the 1970s and even in the 80s, that would change that. They need to know what happened. That's why if we are going to let them vote from the age of 16, they need to know the history of politics right from when Emily Pankhurst and the suffragettes were about. They need to know, because I was around in the 70s, okay, it was a very, very dark, very poor area. And then you need to know about the pit closures and, and the government handing over all of our major companies to overseas because it was cheaper. You need the 16-year-olds need to have all that knowledge as well. Okay, we can't just base it on the future. They have to do their history as well.
Is that really
want to go back to how it was back then?
Is that really
That's
needed?
how we're going now.
Because, like, we're not going to go back to pit closures.
We are, because we just a minute ago, we nearly gave our steel industry away a week ago.
So this is a good point.
That was down to the steel being like, steel, like, the government cannot, like, function like Chinese markets. Like, just because the English have a good steel industry doesn't mean to say that the government can jump in and give them billions and waste billions, even though all the public ever moan about is the fact that the government wastes money. So therefore, it wasn't down to the government, it was down to the Chinese raising, because they can make things for cheaper. Like,
we're slightly straying from
we are straying.
16-year-olds should be allowed to vote.
But exactly, but I think the 16-year-old generation need to know what happened back then.
Okay.
How we got our vote and what happened, have a massive timeline of the different politicians, the different parties that have gotten in, look what damage it is done. They need all that information. We can't just send them a polling card through, register you can register on Facebook to how to vote. Okay.
If the majority
That's pretty dangerous. They lose its seriousness. And at the end of the day, it's serious if these votes get counted and whoever wins has control of the country. Not just this country. We have a big say in what happens all over the world.
If the majority of people are voting, though, experienced the 70s, then why are we going backwards?
Because we've got a Tory
But
government.
this is what I'm saying is, if those people got into power and they won because lots of people voted for the Tories or whatever, then surely that's the people who were there that have seen what happened in the 70s, accepting that it's going to go backwards, and it's not. Maybe young people would have a fresher take on it and would want to see progression rather than thinking it's this kind of. Also, you have this fear of, if you were around then as well, having this kind of nostalgia of the past and being like, back in my day, and then you don't get that progression, whereas young people have a fresher mindset about it.
And a lot of older people are for Conservatives as well, which kind of
is worrying.
Thank you very much for your question. I'm going to let you sit down. You've been stood there for a while. Is there any more? You touched on a very interesting point in terms of knowing the history of education. When one could argue that a lot of people who vote, myself included, might not be as aware of the history, but couldn't you say that, for example, it's about who is here right now and what they are promising? And as long as, say, a 16-year-old understands what this person is saying and promising, that should be the basis and foundation of their vote.
I think the problem with that more now is that a lot of people will actually use news and social media as their form of finding out about what is happening now. Yeah. And the way that social media and the news is, they twist things a lot, so either way you can end up with contorted views of what actually is going on in politics, and a lot of the headlines are all about the negative, so either way they're not going to really know the truth and how the policies are going to implement.
Not just a 16-year-old.
But the older you are, the more you understand about the more positive sides that
You're less naive.
get into it.
Well, I'm afraid we are going to have to leave it there. That was some great points well made. Our panellists, ladies and gentlemen. That just leaves me to say a great big thank you to our audience as well. I have been George Lamb, and this has been The Great Debate. Thank you very much.